Hello and welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today, we're tearing up the textbooks. For decades, we've been told a relatively straightforward story about our own origins. Modern humans evolved in Africa, then spread out and conquered the world. But what if a single, crushed skull, 1,000,000 years old, could change everything? Get ready, because the story of humanity just got a whole lot older and a lot more complicated. Our story begins in China's Hubei province, along the Hanjiang River. It's the late 1980s, and paleontologists unearth a hominin cranium. It's ancient, clearly, but it's also a mess. The skull, which would come to be known as Yunxian II, was found crushed and severely distorted, flattened by the immense geological pressures it endured for 1,000,000 years. Because of its condition and its age, a staggering 1,000,000 years old, it was tentatively classified as Homo erectus. This made a certain kind of sense. Homo erectus was one of our most successful ancestors, the first known hominin to have a large brain and to venture out of Africa in a big way. 1,000,000-year-old Homo erectus in China seemed to fit perfectly into the established out-of-Africa narrative. It was an early pioneer, an Asian representative of a species that began its journey elsewhere. And for decades, that's where the story of Yunxian II mostly rested, an interesting, but not revolutionary piece of a puzzle we thought we had largely solved. But science rarely lets sleeping fossils lie. Fast forward to the 21st century. An international team of researchers decides to take another look at Yunxian II. But this time, with tools the original discoverers could only dream of. The key to unlocking the skull's secrets was technology. The fossil was subjected to high-resolution CT scans, creating thousands of digital slices. Think of it like a medical scan, but for a patient 1,000,000 years old. This digital data was fed into sophisticated 3D modeling software. Here, in a virtual lab, scientists could perform incredible feats. They digitally separated the fossilized bone fragments from the surrounding rock they were embedded in, something physically impossible without destroying the specimen. Then came the painstaking work of digital reconstruction. They reassembled the virtual pieces like a 3D jigsaw puzzle, meticulously correcting the cracks, the warping, and the bends caused by 1,000,000 years of pressure. In a stroke of digital genius, they even mirrored undamaged sections of the skull to fill in the gaps on the other side, finally unveiling the face of this ancient human as it would have looked in life. And what a face it was! It wasn't quite Homo erectus. The reconstructed skull was a fascinating mosaic of old and new. The brain case was about 143 cubic centimeters. For context, that's smaller than the average modern human brain, which is around 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters, but it's significantly larger than many earlier ancestors. It still had some primitive features you'd expect from an older hominin, like a strong, prominent brow ridge and a forward-jutting face. These are classic traits of species like Homo erectus. But then there were the surprises. The skull also showed more modern or derived features. It had higher cheekbones and a more rounded, smoother shape at the rear of the skull. These are traits we typically associate with later human forms, including our own species. This unique combination of old and new was the first major red flag. It was a clear signal that Yunxian II was something far more significant than just another Homo erectus fossil. It was a clue that we might be looking at a completely different branch of the human family tree. So if it wasn't Homo erectus, what was it? The reconstructed face didn't fit neatly into any existing category. But it did bear a striking resemblance to another mysterious and much more recently identified ancient human, Homo longi, better known as Dragon Man. The Dragon Man story is a whole podcast in itself, but in short, it's based on a stunningly well-preserved skull found in Harbin, China, that had been hidden in a well for over 80 years before being revealed to science in 2021. This skull was so different that it was proposed as a new species, Homo longi, Now, the new research on Yunxian 2 suggests that this 1 million-year-old individual is actually an early member of that very same Homo longi lineage. And here is where the story explodes. The Homo longi group is also believed to include the Denisovans. You've probably heard of them. They were a sister lineage to the Neanderthals, known mostly from a few tiny bone fragments and a jawbone, but mainly from the DNA they left behind in modern human populations across Asia and Oceania. Linking a million-year-old skull from China to the Denisovan family tree is a monumental claim. Why? Because it completely messes with our timeline. For years, genetic studies have been our best clock for evolutionary splits. By comparing the DNA of modern humans, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, scientists calculated that the lineage leading to us, Homo sapiens, split away from the one that would lead to Neanderthals and Denisovans somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 years ago. This has been a foundational date in paleoanthropology, but think about the implications of Yunxian 2. If this 1 million-year-old fossil is already a member of the Homo longi/Denisovan group, it means that this group already existed a million years ago. It couldn't have split from our lineage 500,000 years ago if it was already a distinct group a million years ago. This discovery forces us to push that crucial divergence, the moment our family lines went their separate ways, much, much further back in time. The new analysis suggests the split must have happened at least 400,000 years earlier. Professor Chris Stringer of London's Natural History Museum, one of the study's co-authors, explained it this way. It suggests that by 1 million years ago, our ancestors had already split into distinct groups. This points to a much earlier and more complex human evolutionary split than we ever believed. The common ancestor we all share, sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, must have lived well over a million years ago. This new, older timeline has massive consequences for the biggest story in human evolution, the out-of-Africa model. The classic version of this theory states that Homo sapiens evolved exclusively in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Then, in a relatively recent wave of migration, they spread across the globe, replacing all other archaic human populations they encountered, like the Neanderthals in Europe and the remaining Homo erectus in Asia. Now, the core idea that a major migration out of Africa populated the world with modern humans is still very well supported. But the Yunxian 2 discovery challenges the idea that all the important evolutionary action, the very origin of our lineage, was confined to Africa. The presence of a large-brained hominin in China a million years ago, one that is linked to our extended family of Denisovans, paints a very different picture. It suggests that Eurasia wasn't just a colonial outpost for African hominins. It was a dynamic theater of evolution in its own right. Instead of a single, straight line progressing out of Africa, the story of humanity starts to look more like a tangled bush or a braided stream. Multiple, intelligent human lineages were coexisting, spreading, interacting, and possibly even interbreeding across a vast geographical area, from Africa to Asia, for hundreds of thousands of years longer than we thought. This raises some truly tantalizing possibilities. If large-brained hominins related to us were diversifying across Asia a million years ago, could our own lineage have first emerged somewhere in Eurasia, before some populations migrated into Africa, where they eventually evolved into the Homo sapiens we know today? This is still a highly debated idea, and it would require much more fossil evidence from Africa from that time period to even begin to confirm. But it represents a massive shift in thinking. The narrative is moving away from Africa versus the rest of the world and towards a more interconnected pan-Eurasian story. It's a story where evolution wasn't happening in isolated pockets, but across a network of populations that were more connected than we ever imagined. This new perspective might also help us solve one of paleoanthropology's biggest headaches. Scientists have long talked about a muddle in the middle. This refers to a confusing period of human evolution, roughly between 800,000 and 300,000 years ago. The fossil record from this era is a mess. It's cluttered with a variety of fossils from Africa, Europe, and Asia that are incredibly difficult to classify. They have a strange mix of features that stop them from fitting neatly into boxes like late Homo erectus, early Neanderthal, or early Homo sapiens. They've been given names like Homo heidelbergensis or Homo rhodesiensis, but no one really agrees on what they are or how they relate to each other. The new timeline proposed by the Yunxian 2 analysis could bring some order to this chaos. By establishing that the three major human lineages, sapiens, Neanderthal, and Denisovans/longi, were already diverging over 1 million years ago, many of these muddled fossils can now be potentially reinterpreted. Perhaps they aren't confusing intermediate species, but rather early, primitive forms of these already distinct branches. Professor Shijun Ni, another lead on the study, uses a great analogy. He likens human evolution to a tree with 3 big, closely related branches. There's the sapiens branch, the Neanderthal branch, and the Homo longi/Denisovan branch. These 3 branches coexisted, and may have even intertwined through interbreeding for almost 1 million years. This framework allows for the incredible diversity we see in the fossil record. It's no longer a simple story of a linear march from one species to the next. It's a story of parallel evolution, where different groups developed unique adaptations in different corners of the old world. So the reevaluation of the Yunxian 2 skull is so much more than just putting a new label on an old bone. It's a paradigm shift. It's forcing us to think bigger, older, and more complexly about who we are and where we come from. The roots of our species and our closest cousins run far deeper in time than we ever imagined, and they spread much wider across the globe. Our evolutionary history wasn't a clean, straight line. It was a messy, branching, and interconnected web of life. For the better part of 1 million years, our direct ancestors may have shared this planet with other intelligent, large-brained human species. The Neanderthals and the Denisovans, or Homo longi, were not evolutionary dead ends on the way to us. They were parallel experiments in what it means to be human, highly successful lineages that thrived for immense stretches of time. Of course, a radical rewrite of the human story like this won't be accepted overnight. Many experts are urging caution, emphasizing that we need more fossil evidence to confirm these bold conclusions. But a new narrative has begun. The face of the Yunxian 2 hominin, brought back to life by technology 1 million years after its death, is now challenging us to look for the missing members of our ancient family. We have to find the proto-sapiens, the proto-Neanderthals, and the proto-Denisovans that must be out there, buried in the million-year-old sediments of Africa and Asia. The search for the true origin of humanity just became more difficult, but also vastly more interesting. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online.